Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the Audio-Technica ATH-R70xa. This is the most recent iteration of Audio-Technica's R70 series, and it is the third iteration that I have had the privilege of getting in for review and to listen. This is a $349 US open back dynamic driver headphone here. This was sent directly to me from Audio-Technica. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation, which you are about to receive, and they have made no effort to influence my opinion on this piece in one way or the other. So all thoughts that you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. I am an affiliate link partner with several retailers who sell this headphone, so I will put a couple of affiliate links down in the description below and label them as such. So if you like what I have to say about this headphone and you would like to buy it, please consider using one of those affiliate links and I will get a small kickback. I only use affiliate link money to keep the channel rolling. All right, this was an interesting review here because this headphone falls into the camp where it has some strengths. I think it will find an audience. I just personally don't happen to be in that audience. And so we're going to unpack that and make sense of it and find out if you are in the audience for this headphone right on the other side of shameless self-promotion.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
So like the previous iterations of the R70X series here, this is a high impedance dynamic driver headphone. So the rated impedance on these drivers is 470 ohms with a sensitivity of 97 decibels per milliwatt. Right, so it is in that camp, like it is up there with a couple of others that I have on hand here in terms of being a high impedance dynamic driver. I have here my Bayer Dynamic DT880, which is the 600 ohm variant, and then I have the very popular Massdrop Sennheiser HD6XX here, which is a 300 ohm headphone in there. So we will get to comparisons of the R70xa with those two German legends here later in the video. And then I'll also talk about where this fits in with the R70X series. The Refine from APOS, it was a collab between Audio-Technica and APOS, and then also the original R70X, which I reviewed both of those back in the fall of 2024. For context, it is very late March of 2025 when I film this, with a likely early April release of this video publicly, okay, of the same year. So it's been a while since I've heard those, so that when we get there, those comparisons are not going to be as fresh, but I will still share some thoughts with you on how I think this stacks up against those other R70s. All right, but the 470 ohm impedance here, it should get the attention of some because that makes it very friendly to use with a lot of the OTL or output transformerless tube amps that are out there on the market, such as a Dark Voice or a Bottlehead Crack, or like it's the TA66 from X-Duo, I believe is in that camp now. And there was a couple of others, but those kind of amplifiers, Shit Valhalla series, okay, is another one in there. So I think this expands the options of using those kinds of tube amps down here in this price range, which makes it interesting and all of that there. Okay. How is this the same and different from previous R70X headphones? Well, it is a revamped model of Audio-Technica's flagship series that they use for professional headphone use. So they market this headphone for pro audio use, meaning mixing, mastering, monitoring, you know, those kinds of things there for audio professionals. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use it as a consumer, as an audiophile. That's the lens through which I will review this, and we'll look at this headphone because that's how I use basically all the headphones that I get, because I don't do mixing and mastering or live shows, other than just the mixing of the videos for this channel, which I don't really need headphones like this to do anyway. All right, so this is going to be a review from an audiophile perspective here. Should you buy this if you are a music enthusiast looking for an excellent listening experience in your own home? All right, so similarities and differences. Again, it's similar in that it is more designed for the professional market here, and then of course it still maintains the high impedance drivers in there and is still open back and so forth. A noticeable change though is the headband. Unfortunately, I don't have the earlier R70s in here to show you, but those had those like wingy thingies, technical term, okay, on the headband right here that like help fit, and this one, like the headband is a single bar with this kind of comfort strap thing going on here. So they have revamped the headband system here. And I don't know of other Audio Technicas in the past that have done it this way, but it is going to feel a little bit different on the head just because of that different headband structure there. What they did maintain is the cabling of the original R70X, where you have these dual 2.5 millimeter locking connectors here on the headphone end. It is about a 3 meter long cable, which is too long, and then it terminates on the amp end with a single-ended cable here that is 6.35 millimeter screw-on adapter over top of a 3.5 millimeter single-ended cable right there. Now, this cable, just like the other R70s, is reversible, meaning there are no markings for left and right on the plugs that go into the headphone. And it is wired up so that you can plug them into either side here and it will just work. So they are 2.5 millimeter TRS connectors, which are kind of uncommon these days. They are locking mechanisms, which makes them proprietary. And then they are wired up so that they are reversible into either headphone. That is just a lot for a cable to do. I don't want to go into this too much, but I just like it's time for a more efficient, more ergonomic cable design. And plus, I mean, it is just too long. I have to coil it up. It's got some memory to it and all of that. Like just Audio Technica and cables continue to be a problem here. The biggest complaint though I have about this one, above and beyond all of those things, is that to make the leads reversible like that, is that means that you have 50% extra conductive material in the wire that is not being used at any given time in there, and it's not a super shielded like kind of insulating material over the wires there. So you just have 3 meters of extra antenna in that cable. In a professional audio setting, I don't know why you would want that. Okay, anyway, moving on from that. So the headband is different, the cabling is the same, that's a problem, and so forth. But let's go ahead and start transitioning to sound here. Oh, I do want to comment, it is super light. It is like 199 grams of mass. Like it is really, really light. One of the lightest headphones I've ever had come through here and all that. This is what it looks like on the head. The clamp feels light, but because like as in soft, there's not a whole lot of clamp force behind it. But given how light the headphone is, it still stays on the head well, even with the clamp force that it does have here. Okay, so then let's get into the sound and all of that. So test gear that I use for that, a couple of signal chains. I've had it for a while now, so may not list them all, but some of the highlights here. I'm a digital music listener, mostly through Roon, playing lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files, either locally or in the case of FLAC files, streamed from Qobuz, again, all through Roon. Some Roon endpoints would have included a FIO SR11 streamer into a Gishelli J2S 4499 DAC with Burson V7 Vivid op amps and a Swagman 12-volt LPS. That recently has been feeding an Aoun S17 Pro Evo amplifier, which is in for review. I also have in the Schiit Gungnir 2 DAC and the Sparkos Labs Gemini headphone amplifier in between those two, using the balanced out of the Gungnir and then the single-ended input on the Gemini. In between those two, I have a Radial Pro ISO XLR to RCA little transformer box in there that I'm working on a review for. I also use high-end signal chains that included the live harmony stack of the Micro DDC, the Harmony DAC, and then the Harmony HP2A amplifier, the Audma Maestro HPA1 all-in-one DAC amp is in here, and then my personal high-end reference chain, either the Berkeley Alpha Series 2 or the Lampezator Baltic 3 DACs into an LTA Z10E amplifier here. All of that to test this and compare it to some others. Okay, what did I learn through all of that? And why does this headphone fall into the camp of there will be an audience for it, but I personally am just not in that audience? And let's talk about whether or not you are. Okay, the tuning is a little different here. And it kind of, to my memory, what the tuning is doing on this iteration of the R70 here is combining what happened with the original R70X and then the R70X Refined, the ATH collab. They're kind of trying to blend those two tunings together and land in the middle of those with this headphone. So what does that mean here? The original R70X emphasized the mid-range a little bit. Through the mids and the vocal range and all that, human voices and a lot of pianos and acoustic guitars and stringed instruments and that sort of things, they stood out from the rest of the sound stage and all that. They kind of hovered in the space in front of the rest of the music because they were brought forward in the frequency response, which means they were brought forward in the mix and they were just presented in a little bit more upfront way. The Refined, the ATH collab here brought that mid-range forwardness a little bit back into line and then just gave it an overall warmer, fuller, weightier sound there. This one tries to combine those a little bit, but it ends up being a little bit odd. At least to my ears. It may work for you. The XA here maintains a lot of the mid-forwardness of the original, but it tries to add in some of the warmth of the Refined variant, but it does it without the body or the weight of the tone behind it. So it strikes an odd presentation of being warm but also lean. Now, it is not so warm that it gets outside of the range of neutral. So I would call this a mostly neutral tuning again, but it does emphasize the mid-range and like the upper bass and lower mids in such a way that you get some warmth. But I don't know if it's because the decays are a little bit over damped possibly, or if it's just that there's a little bit too much bass roll off underneath that warmth range. It just comes across as being a little bit lean and lacking in fullness and weight in an unnatural way to my ears here through this tuning. It still has some Audio Technica highs to it. It is a little bit peaky, but not bad in the upper frequencies there. There is some air, but it's still, it tilts a little bit warm while still being on that lean end of the spectrum there. So that's kind of the 1,000-foot view of like the tuning and the frequency response there. And so my brain just didn't really know what to do with the combination of warm and lean. Oddly, the last time I heard something like that was actually with Source Gear with the Hollow Audio DAC and Bliss amplifier. Those two pieces kind of were that same kind of just odd, warm but lean, okay, kind of thing that, again, my brain just didn't really know what to do with it. And that, I was reminded of that kind of tonal presentation here with that. Now, all is not lost, and some people may like that sound, and that might work for you, because that mid-range forwardness that is also in there does make those vocals and mid-range instruments and all that stand out from the rest of the presentation. If you are a listener who likes your vocals to hover in the space in front of you and sound like they are standing out and being a little bit separated from the rest of the presentation, this will do that. I don't know if it does it quite to the level of the original R70, but it definitely does it more than the ATH Refined collab there does. All right, so that could be a trait of interest to some there. The mid-range tone and timbre does have some shout and some honk in it a little bit too often for me, which is another reason why it doesn't work for me. And it also can feel like it just gets overwhelming and fatiguing through that range. If you get a lot of aggressively played instruments, like a lot of heavy electric guitars and that sort of thing, it gets a little bit too overwhelming for me on this because of that forwardness, and it just starts to sound like there's a little bit of a glare in the mids to my ears. Now, I should say, for any new listeners out there who may not know me very well, I am a bit mid-range, either insensitive or intolerant, maybe both, probably both. Okay, in that I do not like shout or honk. To me, those are timbre wrecking, and I like my sounds to sound lifelike, natural as possible. So if I'm getting shoutiness or honkiness, that is not the intended thing. Like the vocalist is not actually shouting or honking. I don't know why they would be honking. Okay, but if they're not shouting, then it shouldn't sound shouty, right? And shoutiness is an emphasis on the ow frequencies in there that can kind of give it a tone that sounds a little bit like this, but with clarity. Okay, if you can sound picture that in your mind. All right, so there is that. Now, the soundstage is rather large. It is one of the bigger soundstaging headphones there, and it does a fairly good job of soundstage depth for a headphone of this price in there too. Resolution and detail retrieval are also fairly strong. Room reverbs and all of that are coming through well. Imaging and separation within the sound field are also good. That is connected to resolution to some degree too, because the more resolving a headphone is, the better able it is to pull out those subtle little cues that our brains use to position things, okay, and localize sounds and all of that. So it does a fairly good job of all of those things as well. The dynamics are okay. It is not a particularly slammy or punchy headphone. It does, because of that mid-forwardness, some snare drums and all that do have a nice snap to them. So a nice speedy attack and decay on that as well. But if you are interested in if you're a bass head and you want this thing to rattle your brain in the low end and slam and punch in the bass and all that, it's really not a headphone that does that. But it also isn't really lacking in those things either. Like, it doesn't sound overly dulled in the dynamic presentation or anything of that nature. So it is like a new R70. I think it does have its own character and its sound as compared to those other R70 models. It just doesn't work for me. So like, my quick comparison with the other R70 units is I would take the Refine, if you can still buy one. That was a limited edition, the APOS collab. That personally worked the best for me. Your mileage may vary on that one though. So like, I mean, through the review, I did kind of weave in some comparisons with the OG and with the Refine in there. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about the comparisons to these two. And I pull these two out because they are kind of like standard reference high impedance dynamic driver headphones out there that a lot of people have heard because they are very popular models. If you are a new viewer, I have detachable cable modded my DT880. It normally comes with an attached cable. I did that so that I could plug it into the balanced outputs of headphone amplifiers and all that, and also just not be beholden to a attached cable. Okay, I have strong feelings on cabling, which you may have picked up on earlier in the video. Okay, let's start with a comparison with the 6XX here. The 6XX is warmer tuned yet. It has more overall warmth, but it doesn't have the leanness to the presentation that the R70xa does. So vocals and all that, they just sound a little bit more fleshed out, and it just has an overall weightier sound. It also has more dynamic impact. Okay, it will punch, it will slam in the bass much more than the XA does. Now, what the XA does that the 6XX does not, okay, other than, I should say, just overall, I preferred the tone and the timbre of the 6XX over the R70xa here. A fair amount, actually. I thought it was more realistic and natural, but the vocals will stand out more, okay, and just be pushed towards you and be more emphasized, sounding less natural, but more emphasized on the XA. The XA is much better with the spatial stuff. The Sennheiser has like that 3-blob presentation where it sounds like there are sounds left, center, and right, and not a whole lot in between, and center left and center right. Okay, whereas it's much more coherent with the R70xa here. The but I mean, those are the key differences. They're really on that one. Like, so if you're into dynamics and you just want like a weightier, fuller tone, I think this one is the more natural sounding one. But it also kind of has that Sennheiser veil, where the R70xa does not really sound veiled. But I do need to make a comment on that. We'll circle back to that here in a moment. Okay. Comparison to the DT880, the spatial presentations are a lot more similar between these two. So the size of the soundstage and all of that, the R70xa gets very close to what the DT880 does. I think the DT880 and the top end is like, in terms of the high end of what you can get out of it, has a higher ceiling in terms of its positional accuracy and holography within the soundstage. It sounds a little bit more convincing and real, the way it places sounds and then puts space between them and separates them and all of that. I also prefer the mid-range tone and timbre on this. It sounds much more natural through the vocal range to me on the DT880 than the XA does. It also doesn't suffer from that leanness of the presentation in there as well. Now, key differences here with the DT880 over the XA is the DT880 is way more amplifier picky. The treble presentation on it, because it has kind of a neutral, bright presentation to it. The treble can sound wonderful and natural and realistic and be the star of the tone of the show here in terms of like bass mid-range treble on the DT880 if you have the right amp for it. And the right amp for it generally is expensive, right? It scales up with amplifiers really well, but on a lot of lower priced amplifiers, the treble sounds very sharp, very piercing, very sibilant, very fatiguing. You scale up and it really smooths out and sounds wonderful. The R70xa doesn't quite have that thing. It sounds pretty good on most amps that are capable of driving a 470 ohm load. You cross that threshold and you're generally okay. Okay, so while I prefer the DT880 on the right amp generally over the R70xa, you do have to spend on the amplifiers to get there, and that is a key difference between these two as well. Now, I want to come back to the comment I made just a moment ago about the R70xa not having something like a Sennheiser veil and not sounding veiled. That is true sometimes. And this is connected to its drivability and what kind of amplifier you need for it. It struggles in its resolution comparatively when it's at low volume levels. So below about a 70 decibel average, it did sound a little bit veiled and lacking in detail and clarity to me. But increasing the volume and going beyond a 70 decibel average, which is getting loud but not dangerous, okay, then it really opens up and it sounds a lot more spatially accurate and a lot more details and all that, and you don't really feel the need to turning it up. It doesn't sound like things are meaningfully lacking anymore in the detail and the resolution department. So as far as amplification and drivability goes with the R70xa, not only do you need an amplifier that can handle a 470 ohm load, and those are becoming more and more common at lower and lower prices these days, but you do need to be able to drive it comfortably and somewhat loudly, okay, with your amplifier. And so that's the thing that you're going to have to look in there, because this thing, it didn't really work for me for background music listening either, because I kept having to turn it up and then it sounded right. Not just because it was louder, it was just because there was actually like legitimately more sounding like it was in the sound. All that. There are other headphones that I have, like these two in particular are as examples, where I don't feel like I'm losing out on details when they're at lower levels, quite to the extent that I did here with the R70xa. All right. But I think I can wrap it up there. The ATH-R70xa is a fine headphone. It is just not for me. Okay, it is warm but lean sounding, which some people may appreciate, and the mids definitely stand out and are presented seemingly to hover in the space between you and the rest of the music. Some people like that. That doesn't work for me, and I think the mid-range tonality drifts into shouty and honky territory for me too much. Again, I am sensitive and intolerant to those things, so your mileage may vary on that. It does try to like find a sonic space between these two, the 6XX and the DT880, which are very common high-Z dynamic driver headphones out there, but it also tries to find a space, I think, between the versions of the R70X that are already out there. And it's just going to be up to you, the end user, as to whether or not that works for you. It didn't work for me, but again, I do think this headphone will find an audience. So, I am Wave Theory. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again to Audio Technica for sending this over for review. You'll be getting it back soon. Thanks again to all of you for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.